Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And Ms. D'Andrea, I'm moved by some of your political statements. One of the things you said at the end of last year was, if any political figure or party can direct federal law enforcement against its critics, we no longer live under the rule of law. Do you remember when you wrote that?
Yes, sir.
So do you reject Donald Trump's very public orders to the Department of Justice and the FBI to investigate and prosecute James Comey, Letitia James, Adam Schiff, a bunch of other colleagues, including Jason Crow?
I would say if there's reason and there's evidence to investigate those people, then he's absolutely right to call for it. If not, then he doesn't need to call for that.
Wait, you said if any political figure can direct federal law enforcement against its critics, we no longer live under the rule of law.
I think there's a difference between someone being critical and someone doing something that violates the rule of law.
Okay, but all of it, I mean, the reason why all the grand juries refused to render indictments, the reason why a number of prosecutors resigned or were forced out of their positions were because of the obvious point that Donald Trump is attacking them because he perceives them to be political critics or adversaries of his. And so it would seem to me, just to apply your rule to the facts of the situation, Donald Trump is absolutely taking us outside of the rule of law. I mean, I don't mean to embarrass you in any way, but I liked your statement of principle, and I'm wondering whether you're willing to interpret it in a completely obvious and objective way.
I would say that my interpretation is objective, and I think that without having all the facts about each of these individuals and each of the allegations allegedly, against them, I can't speak generally to the president's statements. I stick by my original statement.
If any president, whether it was Maduro or Trump or Oscar Orlando Hernandez, says, I want you to go and investigate and prosecute these 20 political enemies of mine, your position would basically be agnostic. Well, let's wait and see what happens in the investigation. Is that right? Doesn't that defeat the whole point of your statement?
Respectfully, that's not right. That's not what I mean. That's not what I intended to say.
All right, well, let me ask about another one. I wish we had all day, because you've said some interesting things, which I agree with at the level of generality at which you stated them. For example, you said that Maduro had refused to cede power. I think it was in the 2024 election, and you said that it's impossible to sustain a claim to lawful governance by a leader who holds office in defiance of his own electorate. Well, that really made me think about what happened in 2020, when Donald Trump claimed that he won the election, but the Congress found that he had not won the election. 60 federal and state courts rejected every claim of electoral fraud and corruption. But not only did he claim that he won it, he continues to claim that he won it. So I hope you would repudiate that.
Thank you for the question. I would say that he ceded power. He gave in. The President Biden was sworn in and was the president of the United States. So he did not illegally hold on to power in the manner that President Maduro, illegitimate dictator, did.
Oh, I see. In other words, because the coup didn't work and the violent insurrection didn't succeed in overturning the election, then you think it was all right what he did?
Respectfully, that's not what I said.
I said that's what I said, though. In other words, you seem to be saying that because his attempt to destroy Joe Biden's electoral college majority, which he won by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the electoral college, because his efforts to overturn that on the floor of Congress and with a violent insurrection, then he complied with what you were stating as a basic rule of law principle.
Respectfully, sir, I think there's a difference between asking whether fraud occurred and refusing to cede power once it's been made clear to you that it hasn't.
Well, what's inciting a violent insurrection against your own government?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
Well, you're saying there's one thing about asking a question, for example, going to 60 different federal and state courts to try to get a ruling, but once you've lost all of those, you think it's legitimate within the rule of law and democracy to incite a violent insurrection, as Donald Trump was impeached for?
Sure, I appreciate the question. I don't have a clear answer for you on that.
Okay.
I think that.
Well, we can discuss it later. And I thank you for your statement of principles, which I think are often quite lucid, but I wish that you would apply them even-handedly across the board. It might be tough from the job that you're in right now.
What you just watched is not simply a tense exchange. It's a deep philosophical and constitutional argument about what the rule of law actually means and whether it's being applied consistently or selectively. When Jamie Raskin begins questioning the witness, he does something very deliberate. He doesn't start with accusations. He starts with her own words, her own stated principles. That's a classic and powerful oversight technique because it shifts the conversation from opinion to consistency. He quotes her statement that if a political figure can direct law enforcement against critics, then the rule of law is effectively broken. That's not controversial, in fact. It's something most people across the political spectrum would agree with. The rule of law depends on neutrality. Law enforcement is supposed to follow evidence, not political direction. But then Raskin does something important. He applies that principle to a real-world scenario involving Donald Trump.